All right. Well, looking at the participants we've had so far, we've got a good number of the folks who registered, so we're going to get started. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment and welcome you all. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. This is the 1 p.m. webinar for vendors specifically. There was a purchasers webinar this morning at 10 a.m. and will be another one at 5 p.m. if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the buyer perspective. We have included some of those buyer materials in this presentation in order that you as vendors can make sure that you're working with buyers that should be eligible. Just as a general welcome and excitement about starting this program, the New Jersey Zero Emission Incentive Program, or NJZIP, is a voucher style program that will be launching on April 6th, and it's intended to address some of the requirements that were laid out in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI, Strategic Funding Plan. So NJEDA is responsible for working on medium and heavy duty vehicle support in order to reduce emissions from those point sources. And this is because 40% of the emissions in the state, a little bit more than that, in fact, are related to transportation. And so truly we're using it as an opportunity to both progress and move forward on the Energy Master Plan goals and the goals that the governor has laid out in adopting zero emission vehicles, and in order to help reduce emissions, especially in communities that are disproportionately impacted by it. You know, it's an exciting program. It's not going to solve every problem and every barrier that stands in the way of moving towards a zero emission transportation society within our state. But it is the first of what we hope to be many, and in fact is a pilot of what we hope is a successful program that we can learn from, iterate on, and hopefully become a more permanent program. We anticipate that this program will get to help hundreds of business owners in our state and local community leaders and municipalities in transforming their fleets or even their single vehicles over to zero emission. One thing I am going to flag is that yes, it's a pilot program, and yes, it does have a constrained locational focus, the greater Newark and the greater Camden area. And that's because equity is our sort of #1 priority in working through this. So we want to make sure that that small businesses, minority, women, and veteran-owned businesses have an equal shot at receiving these vehicles, as well as making sure that the communities that need it most are benefiting from these programs. So I'm going to kick this off and get started and dive into the meat. We've got a lot to go through today. I did want to note, just as a sort of administrative feature, is that if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a box that says Q&A. If you have any questions as we're going through, please drop them into that box. That means that will allow us to manage all the questions in one spot rather than putting them in the chat box. So I'd really appreciate you using the Q&A feature. And we'll be doing Q&A at the end. And any questions that we don't have time to get to or we don't have answers to, we'll be consolidating those all into an FAQ document that we'll review, get approval on, and upload after the event in the next day or so. So appreciate your patience as we work through sort of these technology hurdles. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. All right. So I've already noted in our agenda, but the plan is that we're going to be walking through the program at a high level, running through the eligibility criteria for yourselves as vendors, as well as for your potential customers, your buyers. We'll run through the basic application process, again, for yourselves as vendors and the way it interacts with the applicants. And then we'll go through the administration, documentation, and compliance requirements to dive into a bit more detail about what the requirements will be and make sure that you can get those pieces of documentation up front. So what's NJZIP at a glance? I already noted this, a zero emission incentive program, voucher style. The thing I wanted to flag here is that it's a first come, first served program. So there is benefit in ensuring that you, as a vendor, register and apply to participate early so that you don't serve as a barrier to your customers getting access to those funds. And as I also noted, the purpose is to reduce the upfront cost of the zero emission medium duty vehicles for New Jersey businesses and institutions, leveraging the RGGI funding. I wanted to flag this specifically. Reducing the upfront cost is a critical piece that as a vendor, you'll need to help support on. So agreeing to participate in this program means that you agree to accept the voucher as a portion of your payment, deducting the total amount of that voucher from the upfront cost to the customer or the buyer. I wanted to also point out leveraging RGGI funding. This differentiates it from a number of other programs in that it's not federally funded, and therefore certain Buy America requirements are not included, as well as there's not a universal scrappage requirement, although there are some scrappage requirement components, which I'll go into a little bit more detail later. As a starting pilot, $15 million will be available total in the pool. We will be setting aside $5 million of that money for small and micro businesses to make sure they have an equal shot at the pie. Just understanding that small and micro businesses have fewer resources available to apply to these types of programs. We want to make sure that they have the time to meet with you, learn about the technology, and pursue a zero emission vehicle without having necessarily an entire sustainability staff on their side. I flagged this right up front, but applications will be opening on Tuesday, April 6th at 12 p.m. Eastern time. So knowing that some vendors are not necessarily located in New Jersey, please note that it is 12 p.m. Eastern time. That application opening, portal opening, will be for everyone, including applicants or buyers and vendor applicants. Your purchasers, your buyers will have access to create their profile, upload information about their business and their intended use case, but they will not be able to complete their application until you have applied and been approved. So I do want to flag that as vendors, it's in your best interest and in the interest of your customers to apply early on so that the applicants and the buyers have access to select you as a vendor in a drop-down list. So again, I'll get into that in a little bit more detail, but the big flag is in 2 weeks from today at 12 p.m. Eastern, so almost exactly 2 weeks from today, you'll be able to apply as a vendor. So as a starting point for buyer eligibility, I know that in conversations with vendors, a number of folks are already eagerly working on applying or wanting to apply. They have interest in this program already, but for avoidance of doubt, who can participate? What kind of purchasers are you wanting to target for this program? 1, they need to be New Jersey businesses and institutions that are in good standing. 2, they need to be purchasing a new zero emission medium duty vehicle from you, an approved vendor. 3, they need to register the vehicles in New Jersey and operate that vehicle's 75% of the vehicle mile traveled or more in New Jersey for at least 3 continuous years after voucher receipt. 4, they need to operate the vehicles 50% or more in greater Camden or greater Newark areas for at least 3 continuous years after voucher receipt. Or if it's not possible to prove that vehicle miles traveled, they can use registration location, so the address at which the vehicle is registered, and the vehicle domicile as proof in its stead. I'm highlighting here a number of different definitions that may differ from other programs, so I just wanted to make sure that they were clear for the New Jersey program. The first one I'm going to flag is second down on the list, purchasing. I just wanted to flag that the vehicles that are the buyers that are eligible are purchasing these vehicles. While vehicles can be leased or rented, the actual applicant is the one who is doing the purchasing. So if the vehicles are intended to be rented later, the one who is doing the purchasing is the one who is required to submit reports on the vehicle miles traveled, who is the one who is responsible for those compliance pieces. So in the case that you're looking at a different model rather than a direct purchase, I did want to make sure that I flagged that it doesn't exclude you from this program, but the buyer is the one who is required to comply and will be required to submit to audit requests. Moving on to the next definition, what is an institution? An institution is a nonprofit or an organization run for public purpose. So we've got some examples here: library, hospitals, schools, municipal utilities, public rec, community centers, or cultural facilities. It doesn't exclude religious institutions, although there are additional barriers which may come up and we'll have to do additional verification. And local government entities, municipalities or county level government. I did want to flag here, state government entities are not eligible for this program, again, to sort of give access to those local communities and make sure that we're having the intensity and concentration of impact we're looking for. Any type of business is also eligible, but hopefully that definition is a little bit clearer. What is zero emission? Again, not that I don't think the vendors who are selling these vehicles know this, but a vehicle that emits no tailpipe pollutants from the onboard source of power. So just to be clear, we're not including hybrids within this program. It's purely zero emission technologies. So hybrids are not eligible for this pilot program. We flagged here that battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell are eligible vehicles. Other vehicles may be eligible. They'll be determined on a case-by-case basis, so you'll have to submit materials demonstrating that the vehicle is zero emission, aligned with this definition. And then finally, vehicle domicile. Excuse me. This is the place where the vehicle is housed when it's not operating. So, school buses that come back to a lot at night, that would be their domicile location. Although I would anticipate in the example for school buses that they would be operating within the set community regardless. Again, another sort of program-specific definition. What is medium duty in our case? We've used the weight ranges pulled from the Federal Highway Administration, but we've defined medium duty slightly more broadly. So we include Class 2B within our medium duty vehicles, so Class 2B through Class 6. Excuse me. So we include Class 2B through Class 6. All vehicle types are eligible, including not just trucks, but buses, vans, specialty vehicles like ambulances or refuse trucks. These are all eligible. You can see some examples on the right-hand side of what types of vehicles, but this is not limiting them. As long as the vehicle is within the weight ranges and can be registered as a vehicle, then it can be eligible for this program. Continuing in the definitions, another one that's come up quite a bit for clarity is what is the Greater Camden and Greater Newark area? The Greater Camden and Greater Newark area are defined as the overburdened communities within or intersected by a 10-mile radius circle centered on Newark or Camden. So there's obviously a lot of communities that are listed here. The long and short of it is if you stuck a pin into Newark or Camden and drew a circle outside of it that was with a 10-mile radius, you would sweep across all of these communities. There are other communities within that radius that are not included on this list because they are not defined as overburdened. I do want to flag that the requirement for this program is 50% vehicle miles traveled within the communities listed here as eligible. That does not mean that if somebody has a business that's in an adjacent community that's not listed, that they wouldn't be eligible. They just have to be traveling 50% or more of their vehicle miles traveled in the eligible regions. So this is the part where we're getting into the specifics about the vendor. So what is an approved vendor? So a vendor, is a business that sells eligible zero emission medium duty vehicles to the buyer, which is the voucher applicant. The vendor can be exclusively a seller, or they can be a manufacturer and seller. They can be approved, or you can be approved for the program if you apply and are eligible by doing the following. 1, registering to do business in New Jersey and being in good standing in New Jersey. 2, having at least 12 months of experience with zero emission vehicle sales or manufacture. 3, agreeing to the voucher terms, which we'll go into a lot more detail later on. And 4, providing documentation to support to the buyer. So, it's not just the vehicle that needs to be provided. There are, of course, other services that come along with that vehicle to ensure that the buyer can use it effectively. So just as before, I'm going to be defining some program specific terms to make sure that you have a firm understanding of how you can apply. So 1, what does it mean to register to do business in New Jersey? I know there's a lot of text up here, and I don't know that I flagged this up front, but we'll make sure that this recording and these materials are available after the call so you can sit with them, click on the links, etc. But if your organization is making the sale to the customer and your organization intends to redeem that voucher, you have to register to do business in New Jersey in order to qualify as a vendor. If you're not making the sale, for example, the example I have here is if you're a manufacturer of vehicles, and sometimes you make sales, but in this case, you're going to be selling through a dealership in New Jersey, you wouldn't need to register, the dealership would need to register because they're the one who is the vendor of the vehicle. They're making the sale. And you would not be the recipient of the voucher, the dealership would be. So I just wanted to make sure that I flagged that because it has come up. I've included a link here for how to get registered in the state of New Jersey to do business. It's a relatively straightforward and inexpensive process. And I would recommend that if you are planning to be a vendor in this program, but you have not yet registered, to do so as soon as possible. The way that we will be proving the registration is first you register. Once you're registered, you'll be able to get a tax clearance certificate. And we'll be using that as proof of both being in good standing as far as taxation is concerned and proving that you are registered to do business in New Jersey. How do you prove that you have quote unquote 12 months of experience? We're allowing a number of different methods here. You can provide your sales records tracking back before April of 2020, manufacturing records, maybe your business registration or foundation documents that demonstrates that you've been incorporated for longer than 12 months, a website history or press releases demonstrating that sales initiated in a public manner at a set date. So things that we can reference externally to verify your claim. What are the voucher terms? Again, a slide with a lot of text, so we'll walk through it a little bit in a little bit more detail. So the full terms are going to be a full formalized agreement that you'll have to work with NJEDA and our closing services in order to execute, the final terms and agreements with each purchaser that you are applying with. However, the biggest pieces that I wanted to make sure that I flagged up front is 1, you have to agree to accept the redemption of the voucher from NJEDA after vehicle has been delivered and registered as a portion of the vehicle payment. And this is tied directly to the next one, which is you deduct the total voucher amount from the upfront vehicle cost charged to the customer. So in a little bit plainer English, you cannot charge the customer if you've quoted that the vehicle is $100,000 and they receive a $55,000 voucher or have reserved a $55,000 voucher, you can't charge the customer more than $45,000 for that vehicle, recognizing that that is just the vehicle. There may be charging infrastructure or other features that they've added on that are unrelated. So you agree to charge them no more than $45,000 for the vehicle, and you accept from NJEDA that we will pay the remainder and you can redeem the voucher after the vehicle has been delivered and registered. So just wanted to make sure that that is sort of the biggest piece in order to participate. There are other terms. One is that you intend to and work to provide the vehicle within 6 months of voucher approval. Recognizing that, of course, things happen, we are willing to evaluate on a case-by-case basis, allowing for an extension of that voucher for up to 1 6-month extension. Again, it's on a case-by-case basis. It's not universally guaranteed. So I do encourage you to work towards that 6-month deadline as much as practical. You are also going to be required to provide not only the vehicle to the applicant, but the documentation and related services. So the warranty, the maintenance, the in-state maintenance requirements, the charging infrastructure necessary to complete both the application, so the documentation, and actually support the functionality of the vehicle. So if you have said that you will provide charging infrastructure, you need to provide that charging infrastructure. This program does not directly fund or pay for charging infrastructure as an example, but it is a requirement that you provide what you have agreed to provide. And then finally, if you've agreed to any additional bonus criteria obligations, you need to execute on those. And we'll go into a little more detail about what those bonus criteria are just in a few slides. So what support and documentation is necessary per buyer? So there's a number of things that you as a vendor need to do to be eligible, the 12 months, the good standing, the business registration, etc. But what do you need to give per buyer? So one is that you're going to include, and this is part of a vehicle record, you're going to include indication of where the vehicle is available for sale and specification sheets for the vehicle. Recognizing that especially for these types of vehicles, they're sometimes quite customized and specialized. So you may not have a single specification sheet for a vehicle. In that case, you need to provide specification sheets for all the major components, such as the chassis, the power source, etc. You'll also need to provide information in those specifications, or ensure that the information is in the specifications that corroborate, the vehicle capabilities. So if the vehicle is a school bus and you're claiming that it can be used as a truck for a local grocery store, those obviously are misaligned. So the specification sheet will need to corroborate what the vehicle capabilities are, what its charging needs are, and that it's appropriate for the applicant's use. Especially if you are not doing a battery electric vehicle or fuel cell vehicle, you will need to provide additional documentation to demonstrate that it's an eligible vehicle, meaning that it is a zero emission vehicle. So you'll need to ensure that that documentation includes proof of that. You'll also need to provide per buyer the timeline and process or plans by which you intend to comply with the terms of the voucher prior to the expiration of the voucher. So you'll need to provide what's the timeline you anticipate delivering the vehicle on? If you don't already know what the sort of charging plans that you have, so if you don't already know that you're going to have 2 level 2 chargers at a specific site, and that's part of the development process that's intended over the following 6 months, you need to indicate how you're going to plan that. If you don't already have in-state maintenance services, you'll need to indicate how you're going to be providing that maintenance in state. It is not a requirement that you open up a maintenance facility, for example. Perhaps you are working with somebody whose intention is to do maintenance in-house. So that's, there's acceptable different methodologies of complying with this. And then finally, warranty terms, recognizing that some buyers, there's a base warranty, but some buyers may want additional warranty terms. We're tying this directly to the buyer rather than to a vehicle. So you have the flexibility. If somebody wants an extended warranty, that buyer, you can specify that for them. So now that we've gone through sort of the broad eligibility criteria, I just wanted to break down some of the dollar points, the price points rather, on the voucher values. So broken down by class 2B through class 6, you can see the voucher values here starting at $25,000 and going to $100,000. Those are the base values. Now there are additional bonus criteria that either you or the applicant can qualify for. So the ones for the applicant are noted here. If you're working with an applicant that's a small business, meaning that they have 25 or fewer employees in total, or annual revenue less than $5 million, they could qualify for the small business bonus. If they are certified women, minority, or veteran-owned business, they can qualify for $4,000 per qualification. So for instance, if a female veteran was purchasing a vehicle, they would qualify for $8,000 additional per vehicle. And a small business scrappage bonus. So I know I referenced a little bit earlier that we'll talk a little bit more about scrappage later, and we will. But if you are a small business, or if your buyer rather is a small business, and if they have a vehicle that needs to be scrapped, they can receive a bonus in order to do that, sort of to defray the costs. So to dive into details about the 2 bonus criteria that are related to the vendor, there's the New Jersey manufacturing bonus, and there is the driver readiness and education bonus. You see right here the New Jersey manufacturing bonus. Your applicant can receive a 25 increase of base voucher value if you can demonstrate that 25% or more of the cost of the vehicle is spent in New Jersey on labor for vehicle design, assembly, and or manufacturing, or costs of components. So you can prove this. The advice that I've given previously is if you look at how Buy America requirements require certain documentation, that type of documentation will serve you well in demonstrating that you are manufactured in New Jersey. So price sheets for materials, total cost of the vehicle, hourly labor rates and payroll as demonstrated by either the federal 941 or the WR30 are types of documentation that will support demonstrating 25% of the vehicle is of the vehicle cost is within the state of New Jersey. The second vendor criteria for bonus is the driver readiness and education bonus. Now, there's a lot of text on the screen. It seems a little complicated, but the intention here is to ensure that if you're coming to the state anyway to, give a test drive to somebody who's looking at a vehicle, to train a large customer on, how to safely operate their vehicle. The goal here is to give exposure opportunities to smaller businesses who might not otherwise have a vehicle vendor come to their community and explain the technology to them. So within this, the requirements are 8 public training sessions in the year following the voucher approval that overviews the technology or the operation or the safety. Maybe it's around maintenance, maybe it's around charging. And that training needs to be given by subject matter experts within your organization or otherwise. And the vendor would need to provide at least 4 public in-person vehicle viewing demonstration days. Again, the goal being here, give exposure and education to folks who otherwise may not have the opportunity to be exposed to these technologies. Some of the submission requirements in order to qualify for this bonus include proposed agendas for the training sessions, which we would have to review and approve, proposed dates for training sessions and the demonstrations, and proposed trainers and bios. So making sure that we can verify that those trainers are in fact subject matter experts and would be providing a value add to the local business community. And then finally here, voucher limits. So one, a voucher is capped at the cost of the vehicle it is applied to. So you cannot receive more voucher value than the cost of the vehicle. The voucher does not cover the cost of charging infrastructure. So I just wanted to make sure that I flagged that again explicitly. An applicant can, and in fact, we would encourage if they are planning to purchase multiple vehicles, that they should apply for multiple vehicles within one application, as an application fee is assessed for each application that's sent, but not by vehicle. So an applicant can apply for multiple vehicles at once, and the total reserved voucher amount is capped at $1.5 million per applicant for the pilot. This is 10% of the pilot pool, and the intention is to ensure equitable access to the funding to all applicants. All disbursements are subject to appropriations and availability of funding. We will do our best to ensure that when the voucher funding is starting to run low, that we notify people, we flag it on the website. But at some point, the voucher pool will run out. And at that point, we will not be able to, we may have to reduce voucher amount that has been applied for if you're, the application that's running up against that final limit, or we may close the pool down. Again, it's a first come, first served program, but we are hoping that holdback of $5 million for small and micro businesses allows equitable access to small and micro businesses to apply. And then finally here, vouchers do expire 6 months after approval. I know I flagged this earlier, but I think bears repeating. There may be a 6-month extension available, but it's granted on a case-by-case basis. So I really encourage folks to work towards that 6 months target. So after talking about all of these values, it's probably helpful to go through a little bit of an example. So let's just say in this example, you're a New Jersey manufacturer, you're selling a Class 5 vehicle to a woman-owned small business. So you quote for this vehicle $210,000 pre-voucher. Charging is not included in that. So the way we would calculate this voucher amount is we start with the base voucher amount. You multiply it by the 1 and the small business bonus and the New Jersey manufacturer bonus. So both of those bonuses are multiplied by the base voucher amount. So they're not multiplied on top of each other. So it wouldn't be base voucher amount times 1.25 for the 25% for the small business and 1.25 for the manufacturer bonus. It's base voucher amount times 1 plus small business bonus and New Jersey manufacturer bonus. Then additive women-owned business bonus is a $4,000 additive. So you can see the calculation here for a Class 5 vehicle. We started at $85,000, 25% and 25% for the small business bonus and the New Jersey manufacturer bonus, and $4,000 for the women-owned business. The total voucher amount comes out to $131,500. And so the upfront cost to the buyer is $78,500 with the voucher. So what you would receive upfront from the buyer in whatever terms you've agreed to with that buyer would be at most for the vehicle $78,500, and after delivery and register of the vehicle, you would be able to redeem the voucher amount, which is $131,500. So now I'm going to step through the 2 application processes. One is the vendor application process, and second is the buyer application process with the vendor intersection points. So first, the 4-step vendor application process. So you'll create and populate your application. You'll create an account and populate your application. The things that you're going to be needing to enter up front are your entity information. So the name of your organization, legal name of your organization, doing business as, your mailing address, your contact information, your employee identification number, your website that's indicating that you have these vehicles for sale, your proof of 12 months of experience, your tax clearance certificate, which indicates that you are in good standing taxation-wise, as well as registered to do business in New Jersey. And if applicable, you can provide your New Jersey manufacturing bonus information. So all of the information associated with you as an entity that is a vendor for this program. The second step, after you enter all that information in, you haven't submitted yet. The second step is you're going to click a little button that says create, and you can create a vehicle record. It is required in order to apply for you to create at least one vehicle record that is a zero emission medium duty vehicle that you believe is eligible for the program. With that vehicle record, you're going to need to provide at least the make, the model, the specifications, so the weight class, the zero emission vehicle type, mode of technology, and a self-certification that's designed and manufactured in compliance with federal and state highway regulations. So that's the vehicle record. It is only necessary when you're doing your initial application to submit one vehicle record in order to be able to move through the submission process and hit OK. That said, it is recommended that any vehicles that you anticipate that you're going to be selling, or if you've already had conversations with buyers and you know what they're interested in, that you add those at this time, just because this will make it to be a bit more of a streamlined process for your buyers. Because when you add these vehicles, once you're approved as a vendor, they will show up in essentially a drop-down list that they'll be able to pick from. If you haven't added the vehicle yet, it's not a problem. It's not going to stop them from applying in general, but it will stop them from applying at that moment, and you'll have to go in, enter in the vehicle information. It'll show up on their end, etc. So it's a little bit of a cleaner process if you just enter the vehicles that you anticipate selling up front. That said, recognizing that some vehicles are custom, etc., we're only requiring one vehicle to be entered at the start. I did want to also specify that the vehicles are not being reviewed for eligibility until a buyer selects them and submits an application including them. So we're not going to be judging the eligibility of the vehicles until somebody's actually buying them. Step 3 is you submit the application. There's some signatory things that you'll need to comply with, and we'll go into a little bit of detail later on about what those compliance requirements are for who can sign. But you submit the application, we review the application, and if we determine that you're eligible based on what you've submitted and you've provided all the necessary documentation, we'll approve you as a vendor and send an approval email. Once you're an approved vendor, you're going to show up in our drop-down list of vendors in the application, and your buyers will be able to select you. You will only need to be approved as a vendor entity once, but you'll be responsible still to upload buyer-specific information, which we're going to go into in just a moment, and signing an agreement with each buyer to comply with the terms of the voucher funding. It will likely take 2 or so weeks for approval of the vendor, of you as a vendor, after you've submitted. So as such, I do recommend that you apply when the application opens on April 6th, because that'll allow for your buyers to have a smoother process. Your buyers, as I noted up front, will be able to start their application process and save their progress starting on April 6th as well, but they won't be able to submit until they can select you as a vendor and you can populate the vehicle specific information for them. Now there's an 8-step buyer application process. So their first step is they need to connect with you and decide to purchase a vehicle. Then they're going to populate their portion of the application, which looks a lot like your portion, a lot of EIN and mailing contact information. Then once they get to, they've selected you, they've selected the make and model of their vehicle, they'll hit next, and you'll receive an email telling you you've got an applicant and they need you to enter in additional information. At that point, that's when you're going to enter in the buyer-specific warranty, if there is one, the delivery of the vehicle timeline, the charging and fueling information, or plans if it's not yet finalized, the implementation, the maintenance plan, etc. You will receive, as I noted, an email regarding this. Right now, you'll receive 1 email per applicant that you have. Within that email, there'll be links to each of the individual vehicles that you need to update. We're working on potentially having an IT solution where there's a dashboard available, but that is still in motion. Step 3 is that once you finish your work, the buyer receives their email notification of, hey, all the information the vendor needed to upload is uploaded. So they'll submit and their application along with their application fee. And then we review it. So if we've determined based on our review that everything's good to go, they'll receive a voucher reservation email, and those funds will be reserved for 6 months. In those 6 months or less, if you don't need as much time, the vendor and the buyer will execute the voucher agreement with NJEDA. So that's a secondary signatory where you're agreeing to all of the voucher terms connected directly to this applicant. And also within those 6 months, you would deliver the vehicle and make good on the requirements of the voucher funding. So if you have promised that you will provide your charging plan, then you'll need to demonstrate that that's been provided. The buyer will pay you during this period the purchase price minus the full voucher amount, and that's per terms that you've agreed on, but it cannot be exceeding the total value of the vehicle minus the voucher amount. So that price is set by the voucher. And then finally here on this slide, the buyer and vendor, once everything's been submitted, you've got the vehicle registered, the buyer and the vendor submit any outstanding documentation, including the proof of the registration from the buyer, and if appropriate, proof of scrappage as applicable. So I'm going to pause here, and as promised, finally, I'll talk about scrappage just briefly. Scrappage is not a requirement of the entire program. It is possible for someone who is starting a new business or who's expanding their fleet. They've decided that they're going to expand into the Camden and Newark areas, or they're just getting so many delivery requests that they're planning to expand their fleet. Those vehicles do not have a scrappage requirement. So you can buy a new vehicle and not be directly replacing an old vehicle. You can also be buying a new vehicle that is directly replacing an old vehicle, but if the model year is 2010 or newer, those vehicles also do not need to be scrapped. They can be resold or whatever the buyer, the owner of the vehicle decides to do with it. What does require scrappage is if you are directly replacing a vehicle that is model year 2009 or earlier. In those cases, scrappage would be required. And in those cases, the buyer would be responsible for providing proof of same. So finally, you've submitted, you've delivered the vehicle, you've made good on your voucher terms. We're going to review the submission of the registration, make sure everything's copacetic, and if it is, then the buyer voucher would be assigned to the vendor who can redeem it with NJEDA. One thing I wanted to flag is that while the buyer is required to comply with certain ongoing compliance terms, because of the way that we're signing the agreement, the compliance terms that the vendor is required to comply with are, you have to provide the vehicle, you have to provide the agreed to charging or fueling support that was indicated in your plan, the maintenance support that was indicated in your plan, the warranty that was indicated in your plan. If it's applicable and you're doing the bonus training and demonstration criteria, you'll need to continue those within the year following the voucher approval, and you'll need to submit the documentation of the same. So finally, into some of the specifics of how do I actually, what is the list of things that I actually need to do in order to comply? So one, you're going to need to create a login account. If you don't already have a login account, this is something you could do today. You can just go in, this is just email, username, password. So you can register today and have your account set up. When you have your account set up, if you go into our online application center, which is shown on the right, you will not see these buttons. These buttons will not exist until April 6th. On April 6th, they'll pop up and you'll be able to click, and I apologize here, I didn't shift my arrow. You'll be able to click on the NJZip vendor application. And in that application, you'll be able to do the things that we've just talked through in the program. To get that application started, you're going to need your login information, your organization's basic entity information, as we've already discussed, the tax clearance certificate, and this is very, very critical, underlined, italicized. It needs to list the New Jersey Economic Development Authority as the entity on that tax clearance certificate. So if you're downloading the tax clearance certificate, which is a free thing to download, you do need to make sure that you're selecting from a drop-down list the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. You'll need to have your zero emission vehicle make, model, and related specification sheets and certs for at least one vehicle, as we discussed. And you'll need to have an authorized signatory. So as a requirement for all applications, we do require a legal department form to be filled out. And we require an authorized signatory for that legal department form. So you can see this list, depending on what type of organization you are, it might be a different different person in your organization who's responsible for that. To support the buyer application, you're going to, for their application, they need to provide proof of intent to purchase. So when you're having conversations with your buyers, give them a quote so that they have something to reference, that they're proving that they have intent to purchase, or a PO if you're already at that stage. You'll need to have ready, as we've already discussed, the timeline and process plans to comply with the terms of the voucher. So delivery of vehicle, development of charging and fueling, implementation of maintenance and warranty. And if it sounds repetitive, it is. We just want to make sure that you guys know exactly what you need to provide. And then finally, you'll need to provide bonus criteria documentation if applicable. So that would be as part of your general entity information, but not mandatory if you're not a New Jersey manufacturer or doing the bonus training. How to actually get some of these materials. The tax clearance certificate, again, underline, exclamation point, to NJEDA. You can click through this link. Like I said, this information will be uploaded. We'll make sure that you have access to it after this. If you need to register to do business in New Jersey, you can register through this link. We've got this little disclaimer here that COVID-19 is slowing some documentation request processes down at the state. We will accept, as during the early application process, we'll accept, like, if you have an email confirmation that you've begun the process and you've already moved forward on it, we can accept that in the interim. But before you will be eligible to actually sign any of the agreements with your buyers, you will need to have all of your final documentation. So what I recommend is that if you're not registered to do business in New Jersey, register today. If you don't have your tax clearance certificate on hand, or it doesn't say NJEDA on it, that's something you can go and do today. You can request that today, and I would definitely recommend you do that. The tax clearance certificate does expire every 6 months, so you will need to have an active, non-expired tax clearance certificate. So just as a reminder to yourself, you can get it today, but in 6 months that you would need to go back in and get another version if the pilot program is still active and if you haven't received all your funding yet, which I imagine will be the case for most. How to also here is if you're looking for any additional info and updates, including what I've put here is the quote unquote vendor list. So like I said, we had a presentation this morning. We're going to have another one this evening with buyers. One request that we've gotten quite a bit is I'd love to buy a zero emission vehicle. Where do I start? So of course there's no pre-approved vendors yet, but if I have not already connected with you directly and you believe you're an eligible vendor and you plan to apply to be a vendor to NJZIP, so I've spoken to some folks who they don't plan to apply for this particular pilot program just due to time sensitivities, for example, please reach out at njzip@njeda.com, put in the title, request to join vendor list, organization name, and provide a contact who's appropriate for folks to reach out to, a public web page that indicates your zero emission medium duty vehicles are available for sale. So essentially, we're putting together a courtesy vendor list. It does not indicate pre-approval. It does not indicate that you are guaranteed to be approved. Although if you comply with the eligibility requirements, it shouldn't be an issue. But this is as a courtesy to buyers who are looking to connect with vendors like yourselves to learn more about what they can do to purchase a zero emission vehicle. I've also just included here again at the bottom the application portal link for avoidance of doubt. So we have 13 minutes left and it looks like about 20 questions. So we will get started on those.
Okay, sorry, I was just getting back into live version. They're pretty varied. I didn't see a whole lot of duplicates. I'm going to go through, and if I spot duplicates in the way down through them, I'll just skip over. But the first question is about public entities and asking if standard purchase and procurement laws and regulations apply.
I'll have to verify, that exact answer, but I think that with certainty, I can say that if there is a law or regulation about how procurement needs to take place, that those laws and regulations are not lifted for this program.
And then a question regarding, is there a mechanism confirming the percent of VMT in New Jersey? For example, GPS tracking, customer self-reporting.
So there are a number of options. So we didn't want to just constrain to GPS or telematics. So applicants rather can submit, for example, a route map. So if it's a local community center shuttle, they can submit a route map that demonstrates where they're driving, if it's a school bus or similar. If there is a delivery history, that can be submitted as well as proof. Or a usage log. So for vehicles that, for example, at the ports oftentimes aren't going outside of the terminals very often. So usage logs just showing, when it's active and when it's within the terminals. One thing I did flag early on is that, it needs to be the purchaser who's the one who's responsible for things. So I would encourage if somebody, if a company is a rental company, that you are the responsible entity for that compliance. And if you can't, that like something like a GPS or a telematics would probably be a good option in those situations so that you have firm proof where you otherwise would not have the tracking history. But yeah, there's a number of options for complying with the VMT.
And a question about, and I think this was answered, but I'm going to ask it because I don't know if it was answered specifically, about does any funding go towards procurement of Evse infrastructure equipment?
No, the funding is capped at the cost of the vehicle.
On the 12 months of sales records, if a business has been registered and developing EVs for more than 12 months but does not have 12 months of sales records, is that sufficient to satisfy the requirement?
Yes, so if you're registered as a business and you have demonstrable proof of same, and this has been, the area of focus, then yes, that's an acceptable methodology. And we can, I think one of the things that we'll do, I know I mentioned that we'll post an FAQ, but we'll make sure that we have perfect clarity as much as practicable on all of these different questions too. if I'm not giving a clear or complete answer here.
And then here's I'm going to include two questions here. As far as the voucher, is that intended to be used as a reduction in the price of the vehicle or as cash down for the purposes of computing? In addition, are there any restrictions on the purchaser utilizing federal incentives in conjunction with the NJ ZIP voucher?
So there's not any, and I apologize, I should have flagged this. There's not a limitation on federal incentives. So if a vehicle has received federal incentives, that's not a problem. But it cannot be a vehicle that has received VW funding or other state incentives for the same vehicle. I'm not sure exactly the meaning of cash down for purposes of computing, but the voucher, the applicant will never see the full price of the vehicle other than to see that they've gotten the deduction of the voucher. So they'll receive a quote with the full price, but they should not be paying the full price of the vehicle. It should be marked down for the purchaser. And at the end of the day, the vendor receives the payment after registration of the vehicle by redeeming the voucher with NJEDA. I hope that answers the question. And if not, feel free to reach out on NJEDA, njzip@njeda.com to clarify that.
And then defining micro versus small business for the EDA?
There's not a differentiation in what benefits a micro versus a small business gets. So a micro business is anything. I actually am not sure if there's an explicit definition, but any business that is less than 25 employees or less than $5 million in annual revenue is a small business, and micro businesses would be included within that bounds.
Does Buy America apply to vehicles purchased in this program?
There's not a Buy America requirement for these vehicles. And I see one, I think that we skipped over, both trucks and passenger carrying vehicles, so buses and shuttles, are also eligible. So as long as it's class 2B through class 6, they're also eligible.
Thank you. All right. At what point in the application approval process does the charging plan need to be developed?
So in the application process, in order to submit an application, you need to provide essentially the plan for the plan. So if you do not already know where the installation is going to be, if you don't know the count of the count or type of the chargers, you just need to explain how you're going to get there. Before the voucher is redeemed and the final payout is made, you need to provide that charger infrastructure information at that time. So you can submit the application with the plan for the plan, and then prior to approval, when we're talking about you've submitted and completed all your other obligations, somewhere in that 6-month period, you need to submit number of charging stations, what's their rating, et cetera, where's their location.
Question, do buyers pay interest on payment agreements, vehicle loans, et cetera, on their portion of the loan?
I apologize, do buyers pay interest on
payment agreements? So
I'm not sure if I know the answer to that. We can look into it. There's not clarity on, or rather the voucher itself. The buyer would not be liable for the tax liability on that because they've never received that money. But for the remainder of the vehicle, they may be. We're looking into that actually currently with taxation. So we'll verify that and respond in the FAQ when we have a response.
And then is the application fee waived for small business applicants?
It's not waived outright. There may be an opportunity if you have financial need to waive the fee, but it's not waived outright, and we need to see the demonstration of the financial need. That is another thing that we will be defining, and we'll share in our FAQ how that is defined.
So if a business is between 60 and 80% runs to Newark Airport, but is not located within the greater Camden, and it says New York, but I'm going to say Newark area, can the business still qualify?
Yes, so the vehicles, the operation area is for vehicles that are operating in that greater Camden or greater Newark area. So if the vehicles are demonstrated as vehicle miles traveled, 50% within that area and 75% within the state of New Jersey, then it would still be eligible. So it's not necessarily about where you are or even where your business is. It's about where the vehicles are operating. And the one thing I would caution is just making sure that you have records to support and substantiate your claims, especially if you're located outside of the area. An additional thing I just wanted to flag is that if you're noting that your business is running, the business should, that we have another session at 5 p.m. and we'll have a recording of our 10 a.m. session on buyer specific questions that we didn't go into as much detail here.
And then a question about, can the seller increase the price above standard vehicle value? How would the buyer know that the standard price of the vehicle?
No, they cannot. And the way NJEDA is managing this is via our agreements and our terms that the vendor is required to comply with. One thing I would note, and this is certainly a caution to all vendors, is that if you are found to not be in compliance with the terms of the agreement, you may be liable to pay back any vouchers that you received, and you may be excluded from the program moving forward. So it's in your best interest to, of course, act in compliance with the terms of the voucher agreement.
So looking for a clarification on who is required to pay the application fee.
The buyer is paying the application fee.
Okay. Can the voucher be redeemed by a vendor before the 1 year of trainings are completed? If so, is there an enforcement mechanism to ensure these trainings are delivered?
Yes, it can, and if it's being redeemed within the 6-month time frame, that's the recommended and generally required time frame to redeem the voucher, should be before the trainings are completed. Again, this is a case where we will do follow-up compliance and monitoring, and if the vendor does not complete their obligation, they may be liable to pay back the bonus that was given to them, and may, depending on the reason or impacts of it, may be barred from the program in the future.
I'm going to stop for just a second and let everybody know that in the chat are links to the program on the NJEDA site, as well as links to the application portal, links for tax clearance and business registration. The next question, and I'm going to take it from the chat and make it a little bit twofold. If the customer of the vehicle does not comply after receiving the vehicle, will the risk be on the vendor?
No, that will be on the applicant. So any like operation specific ones, obligations are on the applicant or on the buyer, and any vendor specific. So, you know, if you have self-certified that you are in compliance with federal safety laws for highway operation, and turns out you aren't, then that's something that you have an obligation for. I do see we're also running up at the end of time, and I know that there's a number of additional questions that we haven't gotten the opportunity to get to. We will ensure that we upload some of these. We will ensure that we upload all of these and answers to them into our FAQ on the website. I know that I flagged this earlier. I just saw a note that I did want to make sure that I touched on, which is that in order to be a vendor, you need to register to do business in the state of New Jersey. The way that New Jersey law notes around purchases of vehicles is that it is possible to purchase a vehicle from an out-of-state vendor if the vendor does not have a physical sales presence in New Jersey. If there's a physical sales presence in New Jersey, there's a requirement, the dealership requirements come into play. But we will provide additional details and clarity on that, as well as the other questions that we unfortunately haven't gotten to get to, uploaded on our website in an FAQ in the next few days, as well as a copy of this presentation so you can all access the links as well as the ones that patients put in the chat, and a recording of this event so that you'll see, you'll be able to re-listen to it if you missed it or share with others in your organization. Is there anything else we wanted to cover before we wrapped up, patients?
No, I think that's it. I think that all the links are in the chat. The links are also going to be on the website when you go there. So we'll make sure that you've got easy access to anything that you need.
Great. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate it. And we'll get these answers to your questions as soon as possible. All right. Have a great afternoon.